I walked into First National Bank that Tuesday morning to close my old savings account. Just a simple errand, nothing more. The young manager behind the desk typed my name into his computer, and I watched his face drain of all color. His fingers stopped moving. He looked up at me, then back at his screen, then at me again like he was seeing a ghost. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm terribly sorry, but according to our records, you passed away 3 weeks ago. Your son, David, provided the death certificate and inherited everything as the sole beneficiary." I stood there, very much alive, feeling my heart pound against my ribs as the room started to spin around me. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. My name is Faye Morrison, and at 68 years old, I thought I had lived through enough hardship to recognize trouble when it came knocking. But standing in that bank, learning that my own son had declared me dead while I was still breathing, I realized that some betrayals come from directions you never thought to guard against. You see, I wasn't always alone in this world. Once upon a time, I was a wife, a mother of 3, a woman with dreams of growing old, surrounded by the family I'd built with love and sacrifice. My husband Thomas died when our youngest was only 5, a construction accident that left me with 3 children and a mortgage I could barely afford. But I was a fighter back then, young and determined. I took double shifts at the hospital where I worked as a registered nurse. My hands have held more dying patients than I can count, offered comfort to families in their darkest hours, and saved lives when God gave me the chance. For 40 years, I walked those hospital corridors, my feet aching, my back screaming, but my spirit never breaking because I had a purpose. 3 beautiful children who needed their mother to be strong. David was my firstborn, my golden child. While his sisters Sarah and Emily were creative and free-spirited, David was focused and ambitious from the start. He studied while other kids played. He worked part-time jobs to help with household expenses, even when I told him to concentrate on his education. When he graduated valedictorian from high school, I cried so hard I couldn't see through my tears. He stood at that podium, looked directly at me, and said, "Everything I am is because of my mother's sacrifice. I promise to make you proud and to take care of you the way you've taken care of us." I believed him with every fiber of my being. When he got into law school, I took out loans against my retirement fund without hesitation. When he needed money for his bar exam, I sold my mother's jewelry, pieces that had been in our family for generations. When he married Rachel, a woman from a wealthy family who looked at me like I was something she'd scrape off her shoe, I smiled and welcomed her because she made my son happy. Sarah and Emily moved away after college, one to California, the other to Chicago. They called regularly, visited on holidays, but David stayed close. He became successful, everything I'd dreamed he would be. A big house in the suburbs, 2 beautiful children, a thriving law practice. Every Sunday, he'd bring his family for lunch at my small apartment. He'd help me with my finances, insisted on having power of attorney to protect me from scams targeting the elderly. "You've taken care of everyone your whole life, Mom," he'd say, kissing my forehead. "Now let me take care of you." Those words echo in my mind now like a cruel joke. The son I birthed, nursed through fevers, taught to tie his shoes and ride a bike, had reduced me to nothing more than a signature on a bank account, a life insurance policy to cash in, a problem to be erased. My days had settled into a comfortable rhythm that gave me peace after decades of chaos and struggle. Every morning I'd wake at 6:30, not because I had to anymore, but because my body never forgot those hospital shifts that started at 7. I'd make my Earl Grey tea in the same blue mug Thomas bought me for our last anniversary together, sit by my kitchen window, and watch the cardinals visit the feeder I kept filled with sunflower seeds. These quiet moments were mine alone, a luxury I never had when I was younger. The apartment wasn't much, just a 1-bedroom in a building mostly filled with other retirees. But I'd made it home. My walls were covered with photographs chronicling 40 years of memories. David's law school graduation took center stage above the television, flanked by Sarah's wedding photo and Emily's picture from her art gallery opening. My grandchildren's drawings covered the refrigerator, held by magnets from places I'd never visited but hoped to see someday. I was saving for that, actually, a trip to Ireland where my grandmother was born. It was a silly dream for a woman my age, but dreams don't have expiration dates. Tuesdays and Thursdays were my volunteer days at St. Mark's Food Bank. I'd been helping there for 3 years, sorting donations, packing boxes, and sometimes just sitting with people who needed someone to listen. Martha, who ran the place, always said I had a gift for making people feel seen. "It's the nurse in you," she'd say, but I think it was simpler than that. I knew what it felt like to struggle, to choose between groceries and electricity, to smile when you wanted to cry. These people weren't statistics to me. They were reflections of my younger self. Wednesday mornings meant grocery shopping at Patterson's Market, where I'd worked out a careful routine. Senior discount day, coupon clipping, and Tommy Patterson always slipped an extra apple or two into my bag with a wink. I cooked simple meals, nothing fancy, but I made extra portions for Mrs. Chen next door. Her husband had passed 6 months ago, and she barely cooked anymore. We'd eat dinner together sometimes, 2 old women sharing stories about better days and gossiping about the young couple on the 3rd floor who fought too loud and loved even louder. Sundays were sacred. David would arrive at noon sharp with Rachel and the kids. My granddaughter Lily, 7 years old with her father's sharp mind and thankfully her mother's beauty, would burst through the door and throw herself into my arms. "Grandma Faye, guess what happened at school?" she'd exclaim before launching into elaborate stories. 10-year-old Michael was quieter, more reserved, but he'd sit beside me on the couch and show me his latest drawings. He was talented, really talented, and I was secretly saving to buy him a proper art set for Christmas. I'd cook David's favorite pot roast, the same recipe his father had loved. Rachel would pick at her food, always on some diet, while making passive-aggressive comments about the apartment's size or the neighborhood's decline. David would squeeze my hand under the table, his silent apology for his wife's behavior. After dinner, while the kids played, David would review my bills, check my medications, make sure everything was in order. "You're too trusting, Mom," he'd say, organizing my papers. "There are so many scammers out there targeting seniors. Thank God you have me to watch out for you." Friday afternoons were for my doctor's appointments, grocery lists, and calling Sarah and Emily. Those phone calls were lifelines, their voices bringing California sunshine and Chicago energy into my small apartment. Sarah would update me on her work as a teacher. Emily would describe her latest art project. They'd both ask about David, and I'd tell them how wonderful he was, how attentive, how successful. "You raised a good man, Mom," Sarah would say, and I'd feel my chest swell with pride. This was my life, simple, predictable, filled with small joys and the satisfaction of knowing I'd raised good children who were making their way in the world. I went to bed each night grateful for these peaceful years after so much struggle. I had no idea that while I was living this quiet life, my son was carefully orchestrating my death. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks before that horrible day at the bank. I remember it clearly because I had just returned from the food bank where we'd had an unusually busy day. My feet hurt, and all I wanted was to sit down with my tea and go through my mail. But when I opened my mailbox in the apartment building's lobby, it was empty. Not just light on mail, but completely empty. The little metal box echoed when I reached inside, hoping my fingers might find something my eyes had missed. At first, I didn't think much of it. Mail delays happen. But then Friday came, and again, nothing. Saturday, Sunday, Monday? The emptiness continued. By Tuesday, a full week had passed without a single piece of mail. No bills, no advertisements, no grocery store circulars, not even those credit card offers that usually cluttered my box. It was as if the Postal Service had forgotten I existed. I mentioned it to Mrs. Chen when I brought her dinner that Tuesday evening. She looked at me strangely, stirring her soup slowly. That's odd, Faye. I've been getting my mail just fine. Yesterday, I even got that wrong delivery for apartment 4B again. Maybe you should check with the post office. Her suggestion made sense, but something about the situation felt different from a simple postal error. It was too complete, too absolute. The following Sunday, during our weekly lunch, I brought it up with David. We were sitting at my small dining table. Lily was coloring in the living room, and Michael was reading one of the books I kept for him. Rachel had stayed home with a headache, which honestly made the afternoon more pleasant. "David, the strangest thing has been happening," I said, passing him the green beans. "I haven't received any mail in over a week, not even junk mail." I watched his face carefully, a habit from his teenage years when I'd learned to read the tiny tells that meant he'd broken curfew or failed a test. His jaw tightened for just a moment, and he took a deliberately long sip of water before responding. "Probably just a mix-up at the post office, Mom. You know how inefficient government services can be." He immediately changed the subject to his latest case, launching into a complicated story about corporate litigation that he knew would confuse me enough to forget about the mail, but I didn't forget. That same week, Mrs. Chen knocked on my door with a peculiar expression. "Faye, I don't want to be nosy, but I saw David at your apartment on Wednesday afternoon. I only noticed because I was waiting for my daughter, and I saw him leaving with a box. I waved, but he seemed in such a hurry he didn't notice me." Wednesday afternoon. I had been at the food bank from noon until 5. David hadn't mentioned stopping by, and he certainly hadn't mentioned taking anything from my apartment. "Are you sure it was David?" I asked, though I knew Mrs. Chen's eyes were sharp despite her age. "Oh yes, definitely. He was wearing that blue suit he had on at the building's Christmas party. Such a handsome boy, your David." She patted my hand and returned to her apartment, leaving me standing in my doorway with a growing knot in my stomach. I walked through my apartment slowly, examining everything. Nothing seemed missing or out of place. My mother's china was still in the cabinet, my small television still on its stand, my jewelry box undisturbed on the dresser. But something felt different, like furniture moved just slightly from where it had been, like someone had been through my things carefully, respectfully, but thoroughly. That night, I called David. "Honey, Mrs. Chen mentioned she saw you at the apartment on Wednesday. Did you need something?" There was a pause, just a beat too long. "Mrs. Chen must be confused, Mom. I was in court all day Wednesday. You know how she gets sometimes, mixing up days and faces." His voice was smooth, professional, the voice he used in court. But I'd heard him practice that voice in front of my mirror when he was in law school. I knew when my son was performing. I hung up the phone with trembling hands. Something was wrong. My son had lied to me. I sat in my living room chair that night, staring at the phone long after my conversation with David ended. My mind raced through explanation after explanation, each one more reasonable than the last. Mrs. Chen was getting older after all. Just last month, she'd insisted she saw her deceased husband in the garden, only to realize it was the new maintenance man. Maybe she had confused David with someone else. Maybe it was another tall man in a blue suit. The building had several younger professional tenants. It could have been any of them. And even if it was David, perhaps he had a perfectly good reason for being there. Maybe he'd wanted to surprise me with something and didn't want to ruin it. My birthday was coming up in a few months. Or perhaps he'd stopped by to check on something while I was out, noticed I wasn't home and left. He was always worrying about me living alone, always checking my locks, testing my smoke detectors. That's what good sons do. They worry. They protect. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, the ritual of it calming my nerves. The familiar whistle of the kettle, the sweet smell of the herbs, the warmth of the mug in my hands. These things were real and constant. I was letting my imagination run wild, creating problems where none existed. This is what happened when you lived alone too long, when you watched too many crime shows on television, when the most exciting part of your week was sorting canned goods at the food bank. The next morning, I felt foolish about my suspicions. I looked at David's photo on my wall. The one from his law school graduation where he stood between his sisters, his smile bright and genuine. This was the boy who had held my hand at his father's funeral, who had promised to be the man of the house at just 15 years old. This was the son who called me every evening at 8 to make sure I'd taken my blood pressure medication, who had programmed all the important numbers into my phone in case of emergency. I decided to put the mail situation out of my mind entirely. These things happened. Federal services were unreliable. Everyone complained about the post office. At my age, I had better things to worry about than missing credit card offers and grocery store advertisements. If something important came up, surely the sender would call. And as for David being at my apartment, well, he had a key for emergencies. He was probably checking on something and forgot to mention it. He was a busy man with a successful practice, 2 children, and a demanding wife. I couldn't expect him to report every little thing to me. That Wednesday at the food bank, Martha noticed my distraction. "You seem somewhere else today, Faye," she said as we sorted through donated winter coats. "Everything all right?" "Oh, just silly old woman worries," I laughed, holding up a particularly nice wool coat to check for tears. You know how it is. You live alone, and suddenly, every little thing seems suspicious. I haven't been getting mail, and I've worked it up into some grand conspiracy in my head. Martha laughed with me. "Last month, I convinced myself someone was breaking into my house because things weren't where I left them. Turns out, I was just getting forgetful. It happens to the best of us." Yes, that was probably it. I was 68 years old. Maybe I was becoming forgetful. Maybe I had collected the mail and couldn't remember. Maybe David had mentioned stopping by and I'd forgotten that too. The mind plays tricks as you age. I'd seen it in my nursing career countless times. Patients who swore their families never visited when they'd been there hours before. People who insisted their belongings were stolen when they'd simply misplaced them. I threw myself into my routines with renewed energy. I cooked an extra elaborate Sunday dinner for David and the family. I spent more time with Mrs. Chen, helped Martha reorganize the food bank's storage system, and started a new knitting project for Lily. I pushed every doubt down, buried every suspicion under layers of normal, everyday life. But late at night, when sleep wouldn't come, I'd lie in bed and wonder why my son's voice had sounded so strange on the phone, why his explanation had felt so practiced. I'd tell myself to stop it, that this was David, my David. Trust was what held families together. Without it, what did we have? I chose trust. I chose to believe. Looking back now, I wonder if that was bravery or stupidity. The call came on a Monday morning, 2 weeks after I decided to stop worrying. I was washing my breakfast dishes when the phone rang, the caller ID showing my credit card company. My heart skipped a beat. I never received calls from them unless there was a problem. The young woman on the line spoke with professional concern. "Mrs. Morrison, we're calling about some unusual activity on your account. Have you recently made purchases totaling $8,000 at various luxury retailers?" The plate I was holding slipped from my hand, shattering on the kitchen floor. $8,000? That was more than I spent in 6 months. "No," I managed to whisper, my legs suddenly feeling weak. "I haven't used that card in weeks. There must be a mistake." I'm showing charges from Nordstrom, Tiffany & Company, and several online electronics retailers. The shipping addresses are all to 4847 Riverside Drive. She continued listing purchases while my mind reeled. That was David's address, his home address where he lived with Rachel and the children. There had to be an explanation. Maybe Rachel had borrowed the card for an emergency. Maybe David needed to buy something for a client and used the wrong card by mistake. "Ma'am, are you still there?" The woman's voice pulled me back. "We're going to mark these as fraudulent and send you a new card. Can you confirm your current address?" I gave her my address with trembling lips, then asked, "Can you tell me when these purchases were made?" "They started 3 weeks ago and have continued almost daily. Ma'am, do you have your physical card with you?" I rushed to my purse, my hands shaking as I searched through my wallet. The card was gone. Not just that card, my backup credit card was missing too. My debit card was there, but when I looked closer, it wasn't mine. It was an old expired card I'd kept meaning to destroy. Someone had switched them, carefully replacing the current cards with expired ones so I wouldn't notice empty slots in my wallet. After hanging up with the credit card company, I immediately called my bank. My hands shook so badly I had to dial the number 3 times. I need to check on my savings account, I told the representative, reading off my account number from the statement I'd received. When was the last statement? I couldn't remember. I'm showing here that account status has recently changed, Mrs. Morrison. You'll need to come into a branch to discuss this in person. For security reasons, I can't provide details over the phone. Please, I begged, just tell me if there's still money in the account. There was a long pause. Ma'am, I really think you should come to the branch. Can you come today? The room spun around me. I sat down hard on my kitchen chair, surrounded by the shattered pieces of my breakfast plate. My savings. 40 years of scrimping and saving. Every overtime shift. Every holiday I worked while others were with their families. Every designer outfit I didn't buy. Every vacation I didn't take. It was all in that account. Money for my final years. For medical emergencies. For leaving something to my grandchildren. With shaking fingers, I opened my laptop and tried to log into my online banking. Password incorrect. I tried again and again. After 3 attempts, the system locked me out. The security questions had been changed. My own bank account was now inaccessible to me. I tried my life insurance website next. Same result. My retirement account, blocked. Every financial account I had saved passwords for over the years, all of them shut off from me like doors slamming in my face. I picked up my phone to call David, then stopped. The credit card purchases were shipped to his house. He had power of attorney over all my accounts. He was the one who insisted on managing my passwords for my safety. The pieces were falling into place like a horrible puzzle I didn't want to complete. My son, my beloved David, the one I'd sacrificed everything for. He was stealing from me. No, there had to be another explanation. Maybe someone had stolen his identity along with mine. Maybe Rachel was doing this without his knowledge. Maybe. But even as I generated excuses, I knew with the terrible certainty that only a mother can feel that my son was the one betraying me. I needed to get to the bank. I needed to know the full truth, no matter how much it would hurt. I arrived at First National Bank 20 minutes after it opened, my hands still trembling as I pushed through the heavy glass doors. The familiar smell of floor polish and coffee should have been comforting, but my stomach churned with each step toward the manager's desk. Mr. Harrison, the branch manager, was young enough to be my grandson, with kind eyes that reminded me of Thomas. He smiled when he saw me approach, but that smile quickly faded as he pulled up my account. Mrs. Morrison, please have a seat, he said, his voice gentle but grave. He turned his computer screen slightly so I could see it, though the words and numbers blurred through my rising tears. I need to show you something very serious. He clicked through several screens before stopping at one that made my blood turn cold. It was a death certificate. My death certificate. According to this official document, I had died 3 weeks ago from acute myocardial infarction, a heart attack. The signature at the bottom belonged to Dr. Raymond Foster, a name I didn't recognize. The witness signature was David's, clear as day, the same signature I'd watched him practice as a teenager. Your son provided this documentation 3 weeks ago, Mr. Harrison explained, his voice careful and professional. As the beneficiary with power of attorney, he claimed all assets in your accounts, the checking account, savings account, your certificates of deposit. Everything has been transferred to his control. How much? I whispered, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. The total value of all accounts was approximately $347,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. Every dollar saved over 40 years of work. The life insurance payout from Thomas's death that I'd carefully preserved. The small inheritance from my mother, the money I'd saved by living in a tiny apartment, buying generic groceries, mending clothes instead of buying new ones. All of it gone. But I'm alive, I said stupidly, as if stating the obvious could undo what had been done. I'm sitting right here. How could he declare me dead? Mr. Harrison pulled up another document. He also provided this, a funeral home receipt showing cremation services were completed. According to their records, your remains were cremated at Eternal Rest Funeral Home, and a memorial service was held last Saturday at Riverside Chapel. Last Saturday. I'd been at the food bank, helping Martha organize donations for the winter clothing drive. While I was sorting coats for the needy, my son was holding my funeral. There's more, Mr. Harrison said quietly. He showed me insurance claim forms, all filed by David. My life insurance policies, 3 of them totaling another $200,000, all claimed and paid out. My small pension from the hospital cashed out. Even the burial plot I'd purchased next to Thomas, where I was supposed to rest beside my husband, had been sold back to the cemetery. He told everyone you died peacefully in your sleep, Mr. Harrison continued, showing me an obituary from the local newspaper. There was my picture, the one from my retirement party, alongside a touching tribute written by my loving son. It mentioned my years of service as a nurse, my devotion to family, my quiet passing after a life well lived. It requested donations to David's chosen charity in lieu of flowers. I read my own obituary with numb disbelief. David had written about precious memories, teaching him to ride a bike, attending every baseball game, supporting his dreams. All true, all real, all weaponized against me now. The obituary mentioned Sarah and Emily as surviving daughters, but noted they lived out of state and couldn't attend the service. Of course, he'd held it when they couldn't come. They would have wanted to see my body, would have asked questions. Mrs. Morrison, Mr. Harrison said gently, I've already contacted our fraud department and the police. This is elaborate identity theft and fraud. The death certificate appears to be forged. We're investigating how it got through our verification process. He had help, I said, my voice stronger now as anger began to replace shock. The doctor who signed this. Someone at the funeral home. This wasn't just David. He planned this. He planned to erase me. Mr. Harrison nodded grimly. The police will want to speak with you immediately. We'll do everything we can to recover your funds, but... He trailed off, but I understood. The money was probably already spent or hidden. My son was a lawyer. He knew how to move money, how to hide assets, how to work the system. I stood up, my legs surprisingly steady now. Can you print everything for me? Every document, every transaction, every piece of evidence that my son murdered me on paper while I was still breathing? As the printer hummed to life, I thought about David's Sunday visits, his concerned phone calls, his promises to protect me. Every tender moment had been a performance. Every, I love you, Mom, had been a lie. My son hadn't just stolen my money, he had stolen my identity, my dignity, my very existence. The detective who arrived at the bank was a woman named Patricia Reeves, with sharp eyes and graying temples that suggested she'd seen enough of humanity's dark side to never be surprised. She took my statement, examined the documents, and then said something that chilled me to my core. Mrs. Morrison, this level of planning suggests your son didn't work alone. We need to uncover the full network. Over the next 3 days, Detective Reeves and her partner uncovered a conspiracy that went far deeper than I could have imagined. It started with Dr. Raymond Foster, who turned out to be a real doctor, one who'd lost his medical license 5 years ago for prescription fraud. David had represented him in that case and lost, but apparently they'd maintained a relationship. For $5,000, Dr. Foster had signed my death certificate without ever seeing a body. The funeral home director, Marcus Walsh, was Rachel's second cousin. He'd filed paperwork for a cremation that never happened, complete with an urn supposedly containing my ashes that David had shown to concerned relatives. The memorial service guest book, which Detective Reeves obtained, contained over 50 signatures. Neighbors, distant relatives, even some of my former colleagues from the hospital who'd driven hours to pay their respects to a woman they thought was gone. But the truly devastating revelation came when Detective Reeves showed me David's financial records, obtained through a warrant. My son was drowning in debt. Not just a little behind on bills, but catastrophically underwater. He'd been hiding a gambling addiction for 3 years, starting with online sports betting and escalating to high-stakes poker games with dangerous people. He owed over $600,000 to various creditors, including $40,000 to people Detective Reeves described as individuals you don't want to owe money to. Rachel, it turned out, was the mastermind who had turned David's desperation into a plan. Detective Reeves played me a recording from David's office phone, legally obtained, where Rachel's voice was cold and calculating. "Your mother is old, David. She's lived her life. That money is just sitting there while we're about to lose everything. The kids will have nothing. We'll be on the street. Sometimes you have to make hard choices for your family." The plan had been months in the making. David had gradually isolated me from extended family, telling them I was showing signs of dementia, becoming paranoid and confused. He'd intercepted my mail by filing a false change of address form, having everything forwarded to his office. He'd convinced my other children that I needed space, that I was embarrassed about memory issues I didn't actually have. When Sarah had tried to visit 2 months ago, David told her I was having a bad week and seeing her would upset me. My own daughter had stayed away to protect my feelings that didn't need protecting. The network extended to a paralegal in David's office who had notarized forged documents, a bank employee at a different branch who had processed transfers without proper verification for a cut of the money, and even the apartment building's assistant manager who had been paid to report on my movements and let David into my apartment whenever I was at the food bank. Detective Reeves discovered that Rachel had been researching elderly death fraud and declaring someone dead legally for 6 months. She'd studied cases where people had been falsely declared dead and looked for loopholes, weaknesses in the system. She'd found them. The plan was to keep me ignorant for at least 6 months while they stabilized their finances. Then they would discover the error, claim it was a bureaucratic mistake, and hope that my dementia would make me an unreliable witness. They were planning to have you declared mentally incompetent, Detective Reeves explained. David had already started paperwork with a psychiatrist friend of Rachel's. Within a year, you would have been in a memory care facility, unable to challenge anything, while they managed your estate as your caregivers. The scope of it took my breath away. This wasn't a moment of desperate stupidity. This was attempted murder of everything but my physical body. They had planned to erase me as a person while keeping me alive enough to avoid actual murder charges. My son and his wife had crafted my complete destruction with the same attention to detail that I'd once used to plan his birthday parties. Detective Reeves put her hand on mine. "We have enough to arrest them both, Mrs. Morrison, but I need to warn you. There might be others involved we haven't found yet. How deep are you willing to let us dig?" "Dig until you hit bedrock," I told her. "Then keep digging." I made it back to my apartment before the collapse came. Detective Reeves had offered to drive me home, but I'd insisted on taking a taxi, needing those few minutes alone to hold myself together. But the moment I closed my apartment door, my knees buckled. I slid down against the wood until I was sitting on the floor, and then the tears came in waves that felt like they would drown me. The sobs tore from my chest in sounds I didn't recognize as human. They were primal, the kind of grief that comes from having your soul ripped apart by someone you'd given life to. I crawled to the couch, unable to stand, and curled into myself like I was trying to hold my breaking pieces together. The photo of David on the wall smiled down at me. That graduation photo where he looked so proud, so full of promise. I grabbed it and hurled it across the room, the glass shattering against the wall. Then came the memories, each one a fresh wound. I remembered the night David was born, how he'd been turned wrong and the cord was wrapped around his neck. I'd prayed harder than I'd ever prayed, begging God to save my baby. The doctors worked for 20 minutes that felt like 20 years before he finally cried. I'd held him against my chest and promised him I would never let anything hurt him. I would protect him with my life. Now that same baby had tried to bury me alive. I saw myself working double shifts while 7 months pregnant with Sarah because Thomas had been laid off. I remembered pumping breast milk in hospital supply closets, my body exhausted, but determined to give my children the best nutrition even if I couldn't be home with them. I saw myself at the grocery store, calculator in hand, putting items back because formula for Emily was more important than fresh vegetables for me. Every sacrifice played like a movie of a fool who didn't see the ending coming. The Christmas memories hurt the worst. David's first Christmas after Thomas died, when I'd spent the electricity bill money on a bicycle he'd wanted. We'd eaten dinners by candlelight for a month, and I'd told the children we were having adventures like pioneers. David had been so happy with that bike. Had he ever loved me? Or had I always just been a resource to exploit? When did my baby become a stranger capable of this cruelty? I found myself on my hands and knees in front of the toilet, vomiting until nothing came up but bile. My body was rejecting the poison of this betrayal, trying to purge the contamination of being unloved by someone I'd loved more than life. I lay on the bathroom floor, the cool tile against my burning cheek, and wondered if this is what dying really felt like. Not the heart attack David had invented for his paperwork, but this complete shutdown of everything I'd believed about my life. Mrs. Chen found me there 3 hours later when she came to check why I hadn't answered her knocks. She helped me to bed, made me tea I couldn't drink, held my hand while I told her everything through broken sobs. My David, I kept saying, as if repeating his name could turn him back into the son I thought I knew. My baby boy. How could my baby boy do this to me? That night, I dreamed of Thomas. He was young and healthy, standing in our old kitchen, making his terrible pancakes that the kids pretended to love. "He was supposed to take care of you," Thomas said, sadly. "I'm sorry, Faye. I'm so sorry I left you alone with this." I woke up clutching his pillow, the one thing of his I'd kept all these years, and cried until it was soaked through. By morning, I had no tears left. I was empty, hollowed out, a shell of a person who used to be somebody's mother. I looked in the mirror and saw a ghost, someone already dead just like David's paperwork claimed. Maybe he'd been right. Maybe Faye Morrison had died. The woman looking back at me was someone else, someone I didn't recognize. But then I saw something in those red-rimmed eyes, a spark, tiny but unmistakable. It wasn't dead yet. It was anger. I stood at my bathroom mirror for a long moment, staring at this stranger with swollen eyes and tear-stained cheeks. Then I turned on the cold water and splashed it on my face, the shock of it like a slap bringing me back to myself. I was Faye Morrison. I had survived Thomas's death, raised 3 children alone, worked 40 years in hospitals, where death tried to claim victories every single day. I had held dying patients' hands, comforted grieving families, and fought insurance companies for medications my patients needed. I was not going to let my son and his wife erase me like a mistake on a legal document. The anger started as a small flame in my chest, but with each breath it grew stronger. This wasn't just about money. They had held a funeral for me, accepted condolences from people who loved me, let my friends grieve a loss that wasn't real. They had made my daughters believe their mother was showing signs of dementia. They had turned my love into a weapon against me. The fury that rose in me wasn't the hot rage of the moment. It was cold, calculated, and diamond hard. I walked to my kitchen and made myself eat toast, though it tasted like cardboard. I needed strength for what came next. As I chewed mechanically, I thought about David's legal training, his knowledge of the system, his connections in the legal community. He thought he held all the cards, but he'd forgotten something crucial about his mother. I hadn't survived this long by being weak. The same woman who had studied medical textbooks by candlelight while her babies slept was perfectly capable of learning to fight in a courtroom. My phone rang. It was Sarah, her voice broken with tears. Mom, is it really you? The detective called me. She said you're alive. I don't understand. David said you were dead. We had a funeral. I couldn't come because of Emma's surgery, but David said you were gone. Mom, what's happening? Hearing my daughter's anguish flipped a switch inside me. Sarah, baby, I'm alive. I'm here. David lied to everyone. He tried to steal everything and declare me dead. I heard her gasp, then sob. Listen to me, sweetheart. I need you to be strong now. Can you call Emily? Can you both come home? We're already booking flights, Sarah said through her tears. Emily's in shock. She sent flowers to your funeral, Mom. She wrote a letter for David to put in your casket. How could he do this? I don't know, I said. But that was a lie. I did know. Greed, desperation, and a wife who saw me as nothing more than an ATM with a pulse. But we're going to stop them, all of us together. After I hung up with Sarah, I made a decision. I wouldn't just defend myself. I would go on the offensive. David had taught me something valuable about betrayal. It works best when the victim never sees it coming. Well, now it was his turn to be blindsided. I called Detective Reeves. I want to help with the investigation. I want to wear a wire. I want to get them on tape admitting everything. Mrs. Morrison, that could be dangerous. If they realize what they've done is falling apart. They killed me on paper, I interrupted. They held my funeral. They let my friends mourn. I'm already dead to them, Detective. What more can they do? There was a pause. You'd have to face them, pretend you don't know anything. Could you do that? Could you look your son in the eye and act normal? I thought about all the Sunday dinners where David had sat at my table, eating food bought with money he was planning to steal, kissing my cheek while plotting my erasure. He's been acting for months. I think I can manage one performance. I stood up and walked to my closet, pushing past the funeral dress I'd bought for other people's burials, never imagining someone would choose one for mine while I was still breathing. In the back, wrapped in plastic, was my old nurse's uniform. I pulled it out and held it up. This was armor from battles I'd already won. I was done being the victim in David's story. The dead don't usually get to attend their own revival, I said to my reflection. Let's make it memorable. Tomorrow I would start fighting back. But tonight I would plan. David thought he was the smart one with his law degree and his schemes. He'd forgotten that his mother had spent 40 years outsmarting death itself. This time, death had taken the form of my own son. But I'd won against worse odds. The tears were done. Faye Morrison was ready for war. I sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, the same kind David used for his cases, and began to map out my counterattack. Detective Reeves had given me her direct number and promised full support, but I knew the legal system moved slowly. David had been planning for months. I needed to be smarter, faster, and more ruthless than my son had ever imagined his sweet old mother could be. First, I called Michael Hendricks, a former patient from 15 years ago. He'd been a young FBI agent then, shot in the line of duty, and I'd been his night nurse for 3 months of recovery. We'd stayed in touch through Christmas cards and occasional coffee. When I explained my situation, his voice went cold with anger. Mrs. Faye, you saved my life. Now let me help save yours. He connected me with a forensic accountant who specialized in financial fraud and a private investigator who could work faster than official channels. The private investigator, a woman named Carmen who looked like someone's grandmother until you saw her eyes, came to my apartment that evening. We need to document everything before they realize you know, she said, setting up recording equipment. Every interaction, every phone call. Your son is comfortable right now, thinking his plan worked. That's when people make mistakes. Michael also introduced me to attorney Barbara Steinberg, a prosecutor turned private practice lawyer who'd made her reputation destroying corrupt lawyers. Your son thinks he knows the law, she said during our first meeting. her smile sharp as a blade. But he's forgotten the first rule: never commit crimes that leave paper trails. Every document he filed, every form he forged, every lie he told in writing, it's all evidence. And the best part? He used his law office equipment to do it. That makes it federal wire fraud. We spent the next 2 days preparing. Carmen had already discovered that David and Rachel had paid off their most dangerous debts with my money, but had also made some remarkably stupid purchases. Rachel had bought a $60,000 Mercedes, paid in cash, 3 days after my death. David had put a down payment on a vacation home in Florida. They'd enrolled their children in a private school that cost $40,000 a year, all while they were supposedly grieving my sudden passing. The recording device was smaller than a button, sewn into my favorite cardigan. Carmen trained me on how to guide conversations, how to ask questions that seemed innocent but would prompt admissions. "Remember," she said, "you're not trying to get a confession to murder. You're getting them to admit you were alive when they filed the death certificate. That's all we need." Barbara prepared federal charges that would bypass David's connections in the local legal community. "RICO charges," she explained with satisfaction. "Racketeering. Your son created a criminal enterprise involving multiple people across state lines. That funeral director in New Jersey, the doctor whose license was from Pennsylvania, the bank transfers that crossed federal boundaries. He might know state law, but federal prosecutors are a different breed." Detective Reeves coordinated with the FBI, something that clearly irritated her, but which she accepted as necessary. "Your son has friends in our department," she admitted. "Someone warned him about the investigation starting. That's why we need to move fast." Sarah and Emily arrived on Thursday night. Seeing them made me cry again, but these were different tears. Relief, not despair. Emily, my artist, had always been the fighter, and her fury was incandescent. "I'm going to destroy them," she said, holding me tight. Sarah, my gentle teacher, was quieter but somehow more terrifying. "I've already contacted every family member David lied to," she said. "They're all willing to testify." The trap was set for Sunday dinner. David had called, his voice normal, even cheerful, asking if he could bring dessert. The arrogance of it. He thought I was too old, too trusting, too stupid to have discovered his scheme. He was coming to eat at my table 4 weeks after declaring me dead. "Are you sure you can do this?" Barbara asked Saturday night. "Once you're wearing that wire, you're gathering evidence that will send your son to federal prison." I thought about the $347,000 that represented 40 years of my life. I thought about the fake funeral where people had cried over an empty casket. I thought about Mrs. Chen being paid to spy on me, about Dr. Foster selling my death for $5,000, about Rachel calling me old and disposable. "My son already killed me," I told her. "Now I'm just returning the favor." Sunday arrived gray and drizzling, fitting weather for a resurrection. I woke at 5 in the morning, unable to sleep, my heart already racing with anticipation and dread. Sarah and Emily had stayed at a hotel to avoid alerting David, but they texted me constantly, reminding me I wasn't alone. Detective Reeves and her team were stationed in an unmarked van 2 blocks away. Carmen had cameras installed in my apartment just yesterday, hidden in picture frames and smoke detectors. Barbara was at her office, ready with warrants the moment we had what we needed. I dressed carefully, choosing the same blue cardigan I'd worn to countless Sunday dinners, the one with the recording device sewn into the button. My hands shook as I buttoned it, but when I looked in the mirror, I saw my mother looking back at me. She'd been a strong woman who'd survived the Depression, raised 5 children, and never let anyone see her cry. I touched the glass and whispered, "Give me strength, Mama." By noon, my apartment smelled like pot roast and apple pie, David's favorites. I'd cooked them perfectly. One last meal made with a mother's love, even if that love had been weaponized against me. The table was set with my good china, the plates David and Rachel had expected to inherit. Each placement was precise, normal, Nothing to suggest this wasn't just another Sunday dinner. At exactly 12:15, I heard footsteps in the hallway. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to breathe normally. Carmen had coached me. Control your breathing, and you control your voice. Control your voice, and you control the conversation. I pressed my hand against the hidden recorder, making sure it was activated, then opened the door with my biggest, warmest smile. David stood there looking exactly like himself, tall, handsome, successful. Lily and Michael flanked him, and my heart broke a little, seeing my grandchildren, innocent in all of this. Rachel stood behind them in a new designer dress I recognized from the credit card charges, looking bored and impatient as always. "Mom," David said warmly, kissing my cheek. His lips felt like ice against my skin. "You look wonderful. Doesn't she look wonderful, Rachel?" "Lovely," Rachel murmured, already checking her phone. The children hugged me genuinely, and I held them extra tight, knowing everything would change after today. I'd arranged with Barbara to ensure they'd be looked after, maybe placed with Sarah temporarily. They didn't deserve to pay for their parents' crimes. We sat down to dinner, and I watched David eat his pot roast with apparent pleasure, complimenting the seasoning, acting like the devoted son. Rachel picked at her food as usual, making snide comments about the apartment's mustiness. "You really should consider assisted living, Faye," she said. "These old buildings aren't safe for someone your age." "Actually," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I've been thinking about my finances lately. I tried to check my bank accounts, but there seems to be some confusion." David didn't even pause in cutting his meat. "I told you not to worry about those things, Mom. That's why you gave me power of attorney, remember? To handle all that stress for you." "But the bank said something strange," I continued, pouring gravy with a steady hand that betrayed none of my racing pulse. "They said I was dead." Now David did pause, just for a moment, his knife suspended over his plate. Rachel's head snapped up from her phone. The children, bless them, kept eating, oblivious to the sudden tension. "That's ridiculous," David said, his lawyer voice sliding into place. "Must be some clerical error. I'll look into it tomorrow." "It's very strange," I said, serving him another slice of roast. "They said you provided a death certificate, said you held a funeral for me." The silence stretched taut as a wire. Rachel's face had gone pale beneath her makeup. David set down his knife carefully, his movements deliberate and controlled. He was calculating now, I could see it in his eyes, trying to figure out how much I knew, how much danger he was in. "Mom," he said, his voice taking on that concerned tone I now recognized as performance. "Have you been taking your medications? You know how confused you've been lately." "Have I been confused?" I asked innocently. "I feel quite clear-headed. In fact, I feel more alive than ever." Rachel stood abruptly. "We should go. The children have homework." "But we haven't had dessert," I said. "I made apple pie. From scratch. The way David always liked it. Seems a shame to waste it, especially since you never know when it might be your last meal together." David's eyes narrowed. He was a smart man, my son. He was beginning to understand that the trap had already been sprung. "Sit down, Rachel," David said quietly, his eyes never leaving my face. "Mom's right. We should have dessert." I served the pie with vanilla ice cream, each slice perfect, while the silence grew heavier. Lily asked if she could be excused to watch TV, and I let both children go to the living room, grateful they wouldn't witness what came next. "So, Mom," David said, his voice dangerously casual, "this confusion at the bank. When exactly did this happen?" "Tuesday," I replied, taking a small bite of pie. "But you know what's really interesting, David? The funeral home had such detailed records. You gave a beautiful eulogy, apparently. Martha from the food bank said there wasn't a dry eye in the house." Rachel's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. "This is insane. David, we should—" "Did you know," I interrupted, "that when you cremate someone, the funeral home is required to keep video records? Mr. Walsh, Rachel's cousin, was very thorough, except there's no video of my body arriving. No video of the cremation, just paperwork and an empty urn you showed to 50 grieving people. David stood slowly, his face cycling through calculations. You're recording this. Just like you recorded me when you thought I was showing signs of dementia, I said, finally letting my anger show. Oh, yes, I found those videos on your cloud storage. Carmen is very talented with computers. The ones where you coached Rachel on how to make me seem confused? The ones where you practiced your grief from my funeral? We have them all. Rachel grabbed her purse. We're leaving. I wouldn't do that, I said calmly. Detective Reeves is outside with a warrant for your arrest, wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and my personal favorite, filing a false death certificate. That's a federal crime, by the way. David's facade finally cracked. You don't understand, he said, his voice rising. I was going to lose everything. They were going to hurt my family. I had no choice. You had choices, I said, standing to face him. You could have asked for help. You could have told me the truth. You could have declared bankruptcy. Instead, you chose to kill me on paper and steal everything I spent 40 years building. You're old, Rachel suddenly screamed, her composure shattering completely. You were just sitting on all that money while we were drowning. What kind of mother watches her son suffer when she could help? The kind of mother who was never asked, I replied. The kind who would have given everything if you'd just been honest. But you weren't asking, Rachel. You were taking. You were erasing me. Mom, please, David said, and for a moment I saw the boy he used to be. Think of the children. Think of what this will do to them. I am thinking of them, I said. I'm thinking they deserve better than parents who would murder their grandmother for money. That's when the door opened. But it wasn't Detective Reeves who walked in first. It was Sarah and Emily, followed by someone I hadn't expected. Judge Patricia Holstrom, David's mentor from law school, the woman who'd recommended him for his first job. Hello, David, Judge Holstrom said coldly. When Faye called me yesterday and told me what you'd done, I didn't believe it. So I pulled some strings and looked at the court records myself. You filed documents in my courthouse claiming your mother was dead. You used my trust in you to commit fraud in my jurisdiction. David's face went white. Patricia, I can explain. Explain to the federal prosecutors, she said. Your law license is suspended effective immediately. And David, I'm personally ensuring you're disbarred. You're a disgrace to the profession. The FBI agents entered then, not local police who might be sympathetic to David, but federal agents with no connection to him. As they read David and Rachel their rights, I noticed Mrs. Chen in the doorway with several other neighbors, all filming with their phones. The woman David had paid to spy on me was documenting his downfall. Did you get what you needed? Mrs. Chen asked me with a small smile. I've been recording since they arrived. You know, for evidence. After all, David paid me to watch you. Seems only fair I watch him get arrested. The twist was complete. My son had created a network of accomplices, but I'd turned them all into witnesses. Every person he'd involved in his scheme had become part of his undoing. As the agents led David and Rachel away in handcuffs, past the neighbors who'd attended my fake funeral, I heard David say one last thing. I'm sorry, Mom. No, I replied, loud, enough for everyone to hear. You're just sorry you got caught. The trial lasted 3 months, but the verdict was never really in question. David's meticulous planning became his undoing. Every forged document, every fraudulent transfer, every lie he'd told was documented in his own handwriting or digital footprint. He'd been so confident in his scheme that he'd kept records of everything, perhaps planning to write it off as a legal expense. Rachel broke on the second day of testimony, turning against David in exchange for a lighter sentence, claiming he'd manipulated and coerced her. The recordings proved otherwise. David was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. Rachel got 12 years. Dr. Foster received 5 years and would never practice medicine again. The funeral director lost his license and got 3 years. The bank employee who'd facilitated the transfers, the paralegal who'd notarized false documents, they all fell like dominoes. David's law firm dissolved within weeks, his partners rushing to distance themselves from the scandal. The financial recovery was surprisingly swift. The FBI's asset forfeiture team tracked down most of my money. The Mercedes was sold at auction. The vacation home deposit was returned. Insurance companies, terrified of the legal implications, quickly restored my policies. Within 4 months, I had recovered $312,000 of the $347,000 stolen. The rest had been lost to David's gambling debts, but those creditors would have to get in line behind the federal government for restitution that would never come. Sarah and Emily took custody of Lily and Michael. It was heartbreaking, but necessary. I wanted to raise them myself, but at 68, I knew I couldn't give them what they needed. Sarah moved back to town, taking a job at the local elementary school. Emily set up an art studio in the garage. We created a new kind of family, one built on truth instead of deception. I visited David once, 6 months into his sentence. He'd lost weight, his expensive suits replaced with prison khaki. When he saw me through the reinforced glass, his eyes filled with tears that might have been genuine. "I destroyed everything," he said into the phone receiver. "Yes," I agreed, "you did." "Do you hate me?" I thought about lying, about giving him comfort he didn't deserve, but I'd learned the cost of enabling. "I love the son I raised. I don't know who you are. Can you ever forgive me?" "Maybe someday," I said, "but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean trust. You killed that mother, David, the one who would have done anything for you. She's gone." I left him there and didn't look back. The apartment felt too small after everything that had happened, too full of ghosts. With my recovered money, I bought a modest house with a real garden, not far from Sarah. Mrs. Chen helped me move, our friendship stronger for having weathered the strange storm of my death and resurrection. She'd returned the money David paid her, insisting she couldn't keep blood money. The food bank held a celebration when I returned. Faye Morrison's resurrection party, Martha called it with dark humor. I threw myself back into volunteering, but now I also counseled elderly victims of family fraud. It was epidemic, I learned. Children stealing from parents, grandchildren draining grandparents, families destroyed by greed. I became something of an expert witness, testifying in other cases, helping prosecutors understand the emotional manipulation that makes these crimes possible. 1 year after my death, I stood in my garden planting tomatoes with Lily and Michael. They'd started therapy and were adjusting well. Michael had asked me once if his daddy was a bad person. "Your daddy got lost," I told him. "He forgot what was important and hurt people who loved him. But that doesn't mean you're bad or that you'll be like him. You get to choose who you become." "I choose to be like you, Grandma Faye," Lily said, hugging my waist with dirty garden gloves. That night, I sat on my porch with Sarah and Emily watching the sunset. We'd all been changed by David's betrayal, scarred in different ways. But we'd survived. We'd found our way back to each other. "Do you regret having him?" Emily asked quietly. I thought about all those years of sacrifice, the double shifts, the missed meals, the dreams deferred, all for a son who would one day try to erase me. "No," I said finally, "because having him gave me you two, and now Lily and Michael. Love isn't a transaction. You don't love expecting returns. You love because that's who you are. David forgot that. I feel sorry for him." "You're a better person than me," Emily said. "No," I replied, squeezing her hand. "Just older. Old enough to know that the best revenge isn't punishment. It's living well despite the wound. It's choosing to trust again even after betrayal. It's refusing to let someone else's cruelty change who you are." The sun set, and we sat in comfortable silence, 3 women who'd learned that sometimes death isn't the end. Sometimes it's a beginning. 2 years have passed since my son declared me dead. 2 years since I stood in that bank, very much alive, learning that I'd been murdered on paper by the child I'd given life to. Sometimes I still wake up at night, my heart racing, believing for just a moment that maybe it was all a nightmare. Then I see the legal documents on my dresser, not death certificates this time, but custody papers, restraining orders, and victim impact statements. These papers prove I'm alive, that I survived something worse than death. Complete betrayal by someone I would have died to protect. I'm 70 now, and my new house has become the heart of our restructured family. The garden I once dreamed of now blooms with vegetables and flowers tended by hands that have learned to create instead of destroy. Lily, now 9, has her own section where she grows sunflowers taller than herself. Michael, 12, built me raised beds so I don't have to bend as far. They don't call David Daddy anymore. They call him the man who went away. It's easier than explaining that their father is in federal prison for trying to kill their grandmother without actually murdering her. Sarah tells me I'm too forgiving when I send David books in prison, carefully selected titles about redemption and finding your way back from darkness. Emily thinks I'm wasting my time when I put money in his commissary account, $20 here and there so he can buy soap and decent socks. But they don't understand what I've learned in my 70 years. Hatred is a poison you drink, hoping others will suffer. I refuse to spend my remaining years poisoned by bitterness. Rachel never writes, never calls, never acknowledges what she did. She took a plea deal that painted her as David's victim, though we all know she was the architect. Sometimes I see her mother at the grocery store. She crosses to the other aisle, unable to meet my eyes. Her daughter destroyed our families for a Mercedes she drove for 3 weeks and a dream of wealth built on my supposed ashes. I hope the leather seats were worth it. The food bank has a new program now, the Faye Morrison Fund, specifically for elderly people who've been financially abused by family members. It provides emergency assistance while they navigate the legal system, trying to reclaim what was stolen by those they trusted most. Last month, we helped our 50th client, a man whose daughter had sold his house while he was in the hospital. The look in his eyes when we told him he wasn't alone, that someone understood his particular kind of pain. That look makes every difficult day worth it. But here's what I've really learned, what I want you to understand if you've watched this far. Family isn't about blood. It's about choice. Every Sunday, my house fills with chosen family. Mrs. Chen brings her famous dumplings. Martha from the food bank brings her grandchildren. Detective Reeves, now retired, brings her dry humor and sharp eyes that still notice everything. My former patient Michael and his FBI colleagues drop by sometimes, always checking if I'm okay, if I need anything. Sarah and Emily are there, of course, helping me cook, laughing at old stories, creating new memories to layer over the painful ones. We don't talk about David much, but when we do, it's with sadness, not anger. He had everything: talent, education, opportunities, and most importantly, people who loved him unconditionally. He threw it all away for money that's now being distributed to his victims as restitution, $15 a month from his prison work wages. At that rate, he'll be paying me back for approximately 600 years. Greed is a special kind of blindness. It makes you see numbers instead of people, assets instead of relationships, opportunities instead of consequences. It convinces you that love is a weakness to exploit, rather than the only real wealth we ever possess. David looked at his aging mother and saw a bank account. He missed seeing the woman who would have emptied that account voluntarily if he'd just asked, if he'd just been honest about his troubles. So, I want to ask you something, and I want you to really think about it before you answer in the comments below. What would you do if you discovered your own family had betrayed you this deeply? Would you have the strength to fight back? Would you find the grace to forgive? Would you be able to rebuild your life at 70, starting from scratch with a broken heart but an unbroken spirit? And more importantly, If you're struggling financially, if you're drowning in debt, if you're considering doing something desperate, remember my son. Remember that he's spending 15 years in a federal prison while his children grow up without him. Remember that his mother would have helped him if he'd asked. Remember that there's no amount of money worth destroying the people who love you. Because here's the thing about killing someone on paper. They might just rise from the dead. And when they do, they bring the truth with them. The truth has a way of surviving every attempt to bury it. It climbs out of whatever grave you dig, brushes off the dirt, and stands in the daylight for everyone to see. If you or someone you know is experiencing elder abuse, financial exploitation, or family fraud, please reach out for help. Call the Elder Fraud Hotline. Contact your local FBI office. Tell someone. Don't suffer in silence. And remember, you're not alone. There are more of us than you think. People who've been declared dead by the ones we loved most, who've risen anyway, who've chosen to live and love again despite the scars. Don't forget to like this video if it touched you. Share it with someone who needs to hear this story, and subscribe for more testimonies of survival and triumph. But most of all, call your parents. Tell them you love them, and mean it. Not because of what they have, but because of who they are. That's the only inheritance that really matters.